All right, today we're diving into the world of the Germanic Seeress. We're talking about this archetype of just immense power, and we're going to do it by looking at two incredible women. One was a real historical figure who stood up to an entire empire. The other, a mythological Valkyrie who dared to defy a god. What's so amazing is that when you look at them together, their stories show you how this real, tangible form of female power was slowly transformed into a tragic, epic legend.
So our story really kicks off with this quote from the Roman historian Tacitus. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some off-the-cuff comment. This was a Roman general, a guy on the front lines trying to figure out his enemies to the north. And what did he see? He saw that in these Germanic tribes, certain women weren't just respected, oh no, they were revered. People believed they had a direct line to the gods. This idea, this sanctity and foresight, that's the absolute foundation of their power. It really sets the stage for everything we're about to get into.
And that brings us right to our two main characters. First, we've got Veleda. She was a real person, a prophetess from the Bructeri tribe, whose words actually sparked a massive rebellion against Rome. Then we have Brynhildr, the legendary Valkyrie you read about in the epic sagas. So you see the split, right? One is solid, tangible history. The other is this mythological echo. But here's the cool part. When you look at their stories together, you see this amazing cultural shift. You watch the Seeress go from being this sovereign, political powerhouse to a tragic hero of fate.
So, let's start by looking at the very source of their power, which is this kind of revered isolation. And we're not just talking about a physical place, right? It was a spiritual state, a space totally set apart from daily life. It's from here that the Seeress could act as a bridge between regular people and the grand forces of fate, or as the Norse would call it, word.
And this is where the parallel just jumps out at you. It's incredible. History tells us Veleda literally lived in a high tower. People, even envoys, had to receive her counsel from way down below. Then you look at the myth, and what do you get? Brynhildr, asleep on a mountain, surrounded by a ring of magical fire. I mean, come on. One is stone, the other is flame, but the symbolism is exactly the same. It's this powerful, untouchable woman whose authority comes from being set apart, from being elevated. They're both in their solitary high places, acting as mediators between our world and the divine.
Okay, and this is absolutely crucial. Their power wasn't passive at all. They didn't just sit back and, predict the future like some fortune teller. No, they were seen as choosers. They were active players in shaping what was to come. The tribes genuinely believed that when Veleda spoke, it wasn't advice, it was a divine command. She wasn't just choosing who would die in battle. She was choosing victory itself. Think about that. Her word could decide if they went to war, who was in charge, and who would win. That's real power.
So there's actually a specific name for women like this, a volva. It literally means staff bearer. And that staff, well, it was way more than just a walking stick. It was the symbol of her authority, her tool for entering these deep, ecstatic trances where she could actually see the threads of weird, that incredibly complex, interwoven tapestry of fate. So these historical voleurs, they weren't just telling fortunes, they were reading the very blueprint of reality itself.
But of course, being that close to divine power, well, it comes with a price. It put these women on a collision course with the earthly powers that be. We're talking everyone from a Roman emperor to the king of the gods himself. You could almost call this dangerous closeness their original sin. It's the one thing that was guaranteed to set their downfall in motion.
And here's how that fall from grace played out, and it is just so parallel. For Veleda, her own success was her undoing. Her prophecies kicked off the Batavi revolt, and it was so successful that Rome eventually just said enough and targeted her. They captured her, and just like that, her divine influence was snuffed out in a cold Roman prison. Now for Brynhildr, the fall was, well, it was cosmic. She made a prophetic choice, but it went against the will of Odin, the big boss. And for that defiance, he stripped her of her divinity, cast her out, and condemned her to live and die as a mortal.
So, this brings us to the web of lies that ultimately brought them down. I mean, think about it. What happens when a person who can see the absolute truth is thrown into a world built on deception? Well, for both Veleda and Brynhildr, their incredible foresight wasn't a shield against betrayal. It's almost like it was a magnet for it. It led them straight into the trap.
But the type of betrayal they faced, it couldn't be more different. For Valeda, the web of deception was all about big-picture geopolitics, shifting alliances between the tribes and just the overwhelming, unstoppable military power of Rome that eventually crushed the rebellion she started. But for Brynhildr, her deception was deeply intimate and magical. The hero she was meant to marry is given a potion to make him forget her. Then, another man uses sorcery to shapeshift and trick her into marriage. So you've got this political betrayal on one side and this deeply personal, magical one on the other. But in the end, they're both caught.
And this right here, this quote just perfectly captures the tragedy of it all. Think about it. Their knowledge of what's coming isn't a shield to protect them. It's more like a map that leads them directly to the disaster. By acting on what they see, or just by being who they are, they somehow become the catalyst that makes the whole thing happen. It's this heartbreaking, self-fulfilling prophecy where their own sight guides them to a fate they've already named.
And you see this so clearly with Brynhildr. The moment she figures out she's been tricked, her prophetic gift, her spa, it transforms. It stops being a tool for guidance and becomes a weapon, a jagged blade, really. She doesn't just predict her own tragic death. She lays out in chilling detail the complete and total destruction of the entire royal family that deceived her. She makes sure that her downfall will take every single one of them down with her.
Okay, so at this point you might be thinking, all right, Brynhildr is a myth and Valeda is a pretty obscure footnote in some Roman history books, right? So how do we actually know that this whole archetype of the powerful Seeress was a real thing, a living part of their culture? Well, the answer, believe it or not, is buried right in the ground.
This is where archaeology comes in and gives us cold, hard proof. I mean, we've literally dug up silver amulets that depict armed women. We found little figurines that look an awful lot like Valkyries. And maybe the most telling thing of all, we found these high-status graves of women who were buried with wands or staffs, the exact symbol of the vulva. So this isn't just some story somebody made up. These visual markers prove that powerful, prophetic women who were probably practicing these ecstatic rites called Seeress were a real, living part of Germanic society.
Okay, so let's start to bring this all together. What's the final chapter for the sovereign Seeress? Well, in both our real world and our mythological examples, we see the same tragic pattern. We see this ultimate undoing, where their incredible, independent power gets neutralized and absorbed by the world of men. And that's the key takeaway right here, this transition. Valeda, who was once the powerful chooser of victory, ends up as nothing more than a political hostage, a bargaining chip for Roman generals to play with. And Brynhildr, the divine Valkyrie, who literally set a trial by fire for any man who wanted to marry her, is tricked into a marriage that completely invalidates her power. She goes from being a sovereign chooser to a victim of what the sagas grimly call a luckless birth. And this table just lays it all out so clearly. Look at their source of power. For Valeda, it was a mix of political and spiritual authority on the ground. For Brynhildr, it was purely cosmic, a prophetic power given to her by the gods. Then look at their downfall. Valeda went up against the entire Roman Empire. Brynhildr, she faced the wrath of a god and the betrayal of mortals. And that, of course, leaves them with completely different legacies. One is recorded in the footnotes of history books, and the other is immortalized in the fire of epic poetry.
And that right there is the final crucial difference between them. Valeda, the real woman, is ultimately silenced. Her story just kind of ends in a Roman prison, with her voice only surviving because her enemies wrote it down. But Brynhildr, the myth, she gets the last word. She makes a choice. By throwing herself on her beloved's funeral pyre, she makes one final sovereign act of will. She turns her own tragedy into this permanent symbol of honor, making damn sure her story would never, ever be forgotten.
When you boil it all down, the stories of Valeda and Brynhildr are a powerful reminder of both the incredible power and the terrible danger of being a Seeress. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? The vulva, with her staff, she's a bridge, a connection between our messy, everyday world of people and politics and that vast, cosmic realm of fate and the gods.
And so I'll leave you with this final question to think about. What is the real price of seeing the future? For women like these, who could see the unvarnished truth in a world full of lies, was their gift a true bridge to the stars, a connection to the divine, or was it just a shortcut, a faster path to the funeral pyre? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.